Hi. How's your morning been? Yeah? And your break was good? Awesome. Okay, so Forbidden Planet. Let me explain a little bit about what Forbidden Planet is. Forbidden Planet is the first big budget Hollywood movie from 1956 that they invested in for a sci-fi movie. So, I mean, yes, there was like the 1913, Journey to the Moon. There was also the 1928 Metropolis, which is really epic. But this is the one where they said, you know what? Let's throw some money at this and see what we can do. All right, so this is sci-fi, which means between Metropolis and this is where you're going to see a lot of influences for modern sci-fi. However, we are going to tell a story today, and hopefully you will all enjoy this adventure we're about to go on. Should be fun. And yes, it is a talk about imposter syndrome, and those are usually kind of depressing and annoying, and everyone relates, but everyone's kind of sad. That's not this story. This story is about overcoming it. Okay, but first, before we can overcome it, we have to get into it. So, Forbidden Planet cured my imposter syndrome. Starring Leslie Nielsen, and yes, that Leslie Nielsen. This is probably his first breakout role in Hollywood. It is also probably the one and only time he played a serious role. And we are also guest starring Robbie the Robot, who is playing Babel today. So, our good ship, Node and NPM, takes us to Altair 4, where our adventure begins. All right? We have landed on Altair 4. The skies are green. It's very strange. There's multiple moons. It's very beautiful, though. But there's only one survivor in a colony we expected to find that landed here 20 years ago. So where did they go? Why can't we rescue them? Not long after that, a lovely item arrived that brought them to Dr. Morbius. All right, so our lovely JavaScript. We're going with Angular, React, and Ember. And the reason why I chose these is because this is my story. All right, so I'm not going to tell you really who Dr. Morbius is. Those are spoilers. We will get to there in a moment. However, Dr. Morbius does have a very lovely daughter. And she's never seen a JavaScript framework before, ladies and gentlemen. All right, so since this is me, can't you tell? I am a senior software engineer with Formidable Labs. Formidable Labs is a contracting and consulting company that specializes in training you and your team while we work shoulder to shoulder with you to set up the new technologies that you're wanting to work with, or the old ones that you didn't set up right in the first place. So we're specializing in React, React.js, Node, GraphQL, and all the surrounding technologies we have. Some with Reason and TypeScript, and it's very fun, and we're very knowledgeable, I promise. So as opposed to setting it up wrong the first time and the second time and the third time and 2 years later finally figuring it out, just hire us and we'll help you get it set up the first time. All right, so back to our story. JavaScript. All right, and they see her and they're like, wow, we've been on our ship for a year. And this is 1956, ladies and gentlemen and friends. It is before, sexism wasn't a thing. So there's no men on that ship, or no women on that ship, all men. Okay, so we have Ember saying, one of us. He is our lieutenant today, so he is subordinate to our commander React. We have Dr. Angular, who kind of plays the best wingman ever. So Ember introduces himself. And as I was looking at Ember and trying to figure out how this code was supposed to go together, I was having issues. Ember was nice and all, and it was easy to put things together, but I was having a really hard time with some of the obvious basics. Okay, I came from a PHP and JavaScript and HTML background, so trying to deal with the JavaScript framework back when all of these were new was a little befuddling. At that point, what I'd had problems with was trying to figure out how to make this single-page app into a multi-page app. Like you could switch pages, but all of the code had to go into this one file as far as I could tell. I was having problems, clearly, right? So what I did notice, though, is this new framework called React. And it was pretty fancy, and people were starting to say nice things about it and whatnot. And there's always the concern when you're on the bleeding edge that you're the one that's bleeding. So, sometimes it's better to stay with something that's a little bit older. That's why you don't necessarily update the very second that a framework updates. You want to kind of give it a second to settle before, you switch. So, Ember was still looking really good, but React was looking interesting. At about this time, we had Webpack and Babel kind of coming together to start allowing us to test out these new features that are coming out of TC39 before they were actually released. We were able to, play with ASTs and find new ways of doing things, and it was really rather magical, right? It was like the time where we actually got to see what was coming and get to play with it and debunk it if it sucked and really enjoy it if it didn't. But because of that, it seemed like a lot of conferences kind of exploded out of nowhere. And with that also came a lot of new technologies, a lot of new ideas, and a lot of new libraries, and a lot of new ways of doing things. So, and I like to say that out of all of these conferences also came a few compaholics. So knowing that that's going on, we're going to switch over to what's happening now in our story. And Ember is saying, you know what? We've been kind of playing at this for a minute. Why don't we really give this a try? And I'm like, you know what? Sure. We'll figure it out. Necessity is, breeds invention, right? So let's dive in and see if we can really figure out how to do this. And Ember's cranking along and doing happy things, and everyone's all excited about Ember, and I'm just like disappointed. It's just it wasn't clicking. I wasn't quite getting it. And again, React started coming back into my life. Now I love this slide because, as we remember, React is the commanding officer. So he literally walked in on Ember like kissing the locals. Not a good thing for that local or the junior officer. So, with all these technologies start coming a little bit of imposter syndrome, and the fact that there's so much coming out, so much being released. Like, what libraries do you actually need to use? Which ones are actually going to be best for your project? Which ones are going to be best for all the projects that you're working on? Should you switch to something else now that you're halfway through this project? Should you not? Should you wait? Should you keep looking? And while you're kind of contemplating this, there's more things being released. It's like, a new JavaScript library every 2.6 seconds, Something is always new. And it's always coming at you at lightning pace. So it's just kind of, it's just a lot all at once, especially when you're still kind of new to the JavaScript community. It can be difficult to try to wrap your head around what to do in that situation. And so, complaints is always an option. And, the other thing is that there's churn. So, one framework comes, one framework dies. There's a maintainer that lets go of a library. We thought it was great, but, it hasn't been updated in 6 months. Or we think this new one is really cool, but it's got no documentation. It can be hard to read. So, they come, they go, right? And in this case, I really liked React, but it was definitely a change. There was that whole context shift with state-based as opposed to, handling every step all the way down. So it was just weird. It was weird. And then ES6 came out. So it got even weirder. But you know what? I was going to beat this. So I started playing with CodePen, started putting together a bunch of different designs and layouts, and my website is one of the things that I started messing with. It ended up not being React, but it ended up being really cool anyway. And then I actually dove into SVGs and manually coded a bathtub and bubbles and animations by hand, because if you don't, I mean, if you use the GUIs that just kind of draw this thing and animate it for me, then you don't really necessarily understand like all the nuances and details of what goes on in a SVG. So I hand coded it. It was a really long weekend, and it's not as cool as I thought it was going to be. So there is that, but it's on CodePen, so if you're interested. Still not React, though. Back at home base, or ship base in this case. Imposter syndrome sabotages my communication array. All right, again, a lot of stuff was coming my way, a lot of new things. And I worked in a group that really liked to explore these ideas. And I was starting to get scared because I was in the middle of a room full of people that were really excited about new things, and I had no idea what was going on. So the harder it got, the less I talked. The harder it got, the less I was willing to share those fears and to lose my credibility over the fact that I'd worked so long to get so good, and now everything was shifting underneath my feet. So I mean, like, PHP was the thing. And if it wasn't PHP, it was .NET. And at that point, JavaScript kind of swooped in and pulled the rug underneath a lot of us, and it was a little bit of a difficult transition. So with that sabotage, I stopped talking to my boss. So in our story, there's only so many people that are going to sabotage our ship, right? There's only going to be on this planet of us and 2 people who is going to sabotage our ship. So we're going to go talk to Dr. Morbius, and we're going to leave Mr. Kissy Lips here. And I'd been learning JavaScript. It was true that I didn't really know it very well. I'd used it for basic things, simple animations, but I'd never really dove into the project or dove into the language as deeply as I should have. So I'd been learning it. I was really getting a handle on it, right? But then, CSS and JS kind of came out. And I was so used to standard vanilla CSS. And then I discovered there was Sass. And I loved it because I could do some really cool things with Sass. I could reduce the amount of CSS that I had to maintain. I could break it up into individual components that I could then import only when I was utilizing those components. I could, it was really cool. So CSS, Sass, CSS modules was doing a lot of what I wanted to. I mean, I didn't even have to worry about BEM naming conventions because Webpack would handle it for me. So CSS and JS comes on the scene, and we all know that war. It's still going on at this point. And I still think that there's a place for both. So sidestepping that one, there is a place for both. So React allowed me to do both. React gave me those choices. And once I understood JavaScript enough, React started to make sense. That context shift into state-based architecture really started to shine, especially when I was working on forms with errors and all sorts of different show these fields but don't show those fields until these fields have something in them, and they don't match these fields but they do match those fields. And though it was complex, it made sense, and you could follow the path, and you didn't have to look at a single file that had 5,000 lines of JavaScript to make it work. It really made sense. So we're here to talk to Dr. Morbius, though. We break into Dr. Morbius's office. And by break in, we mean we walk up to the door and the door opens and he's not in there. So we start looking at the papers and trying to figure out, like, does he have something to do with this? What's he working on? Like, he's on this planet with a monster and he's still alive. His colony is gone. And we're getting sabotaged. Just to remind you where we are. And it turns out that they're standing on top of a huge machine. So remember okay, no one remembers. But remember, like, your grandparents would remember way back in the day when computers would take up this entire wall? And it, like, could add numbers together for you? All right, so this is a technology that would laugh at ours. Like, this computer is too big for me. It's 15 inches, but I mean, our calculators, our phones have more computing power than the entirety of the Apollo missions that got us to the moon. Like, dead serious, they use slide rules for that. Slide rules and women with smart brains. Okay? So the technology we have here is ridiculous. So they don't need this technology. They've figured out brain-to-computer interaction. And this machine that they're standing on is 20 miles in that direction, 20 miles in that direction, and 7,800 levels deep. That is huge. And they think our computers are child's play. They wouldn't even give children our computers. They're crappy. So what is this machine for? As far as Morbius can tell, the monster took everyone out. They're no longer in tech. Now I want to talk about intelligence, because there is a problem with comparing intelligence. All right, so Morbius uses this machine, blah, blah, blah. It boosts his brain. It's real nice. You know, he's super smart now. But this is where we think our heroes land on this scale. People like Sarah Drasner or Brian Holt or, you know, Dan Abramov or, you know, Jem Young. Oh my God. Lots of smart people. This is where we think they are. And compared to them, this is where we think we are. We're just average Joes and Janes and trying to do what it is we do. Trying to survive the next stupid form that, you know, we're given with 17 different colored buttons. And this is where we think we should be, with the level of innovation that's going on, the work that we have to do, the work that we'd like to do, how long it takes to get that work done, how some people like Max Stoiber come in and create styled components at like 19 years old. You know, it's rough. But this is where we actually are. This is the reality. They're not as smart as we think they are, and we're not as dumb as we think we are. We're actually extremely close. And a lot of the differences come in through opportunity, time, freedom, not having 4 kids. You know, and some of it is motivation. But when we have a lot of work to do, it can be rough to give life to all of those new ideas we have, or to even think them up. I'm still trying to figure out what I'm having for dinner tonight. So the monster has left footprints when he sabotaged our communications array. We've taken a cast and we are looking at this thing, and it really does defy logic. There's nothing about this footprint that makes a understandable item. So the first real evidences of my imposter syndrome, once I'd stopped talking to my boss, was that I'd started working longer and later. Because if I couldn't get the task done in the time that I was allotted, I was going to have to work longer and later to get it done. Right? There was a lot more irritability towards not only new technology, but the coworkers that were bringing up that new technology, and with myself and with my boss and all the new things that were coming through. I definitely stopped asking for help because I didn't want other people to know that I was starting to slip. And when I walked into a room and there was a technical conversation going on, I basically wallflowered myself. I was afraid to invest myself and my pride into these conversations when I didn't really know what was going on, and everyone else seemed to know what was going on. And because of that, I started having lots of code nightmares and not sleeping, worrying about the tasks that I was having problems with. So this starts feeding into itself, right? The less you sleep, the less smart you are. The less likely it is you can learn something new. The more stress you experience from those things, the more tired you get. And the more tired you are, the less smart you are. So by the time I really identified and saw imposter syndrome, it was almost too late. I was reaching burnout. I had no self-esteem, particularly in my coding skills. I had isolated myself from everyone, my coworkers, my boss, even my husband. You know, I had found excuses not to go to work. So who here has woken up and gone, oh, I felt a pinch, I'm not going to work today. I must be sick. I must have a headache. Like 5 people raised their hands, come on. Who has come up with a bullshit excuse not to go to work? Thank you. All right? And then there's the tedious tasks. You know, the ones where it's like, okay, I need you to go in and I need you to update this one parameter from being a misspelling to being correct, and oh, it's on like 400 files. Me too. Right? Those things I would sit there and I'd stare at. I had a really hard time with those. Really, really hard time, like so hard of a time forcing myself to do those that I wouldn't get them done. Like I would procrastinate and stare at a screen for hours longer than it would have taken me to just do that task. And I started job hunting. And we're not talking a new tech job. We're like, maybe I should be a janitor. Like maybe this would be more appropriate for my intelligence level. I'm a smart cookie kid. I really am. All right, but I didn't feel it at that point. So in our story, our last-ditch effort to keep me in tech is the doc takes the brain boost to start understanding what's going on. And not everyone survives this brain boost. So Doc's last words, really, were the ancients left tech because of monsters from the id. What does that even mean? So what is the id, Morbius? The id is actually an 18th and 19th century term for our subconscious and our ego. Ego being originally the internal part of ourself that controls our self behaviors. Monsters from the subconscious. Monsters from our ego. Who is Morbius? From the moment we've landed on this planet, he's let us know that there's a monster. He tried to chase us away. His colony is gone because they suffered burnout and wanted to go home. What does this machine do? It is a human brain interface. Monsters from the id. Morbius has been creating our monster. But wait. Morbius is my pride. I'm creating this monster. Burnout is coming. It's right there at the door. This impenetrable door is being melted by my own monster coming for me. The only way to do this is to not give the beast the power to destroy me. So with Morbius's death and the concept that we are technically killing ourselves or our pride, the fact that it turned out that my inability to do menial tasks ended up being a pretty awesome case of ADHD. The fact that it turned out that I do suffer from anxiety, enough that I have to be medicated, just a little. But sometimes you need help to get over those lumps. Sometimes you just need to talk to someone about this, because by the time you've reached this point, you have shut down your support structure. The big thing about feeding the beast is forgetting to take care of yourselves. So if you're suffering from anxiety or depression or contemplating suicide, or someone that you know is, definitely get help. Talk to someone. So let's talk about imposter syndrome, now that we've gone through our story. It should be used as a tool. I feel like we've all suffered it for the most part. And the ones that say they don't have discovered the secret, the magic key. That imposter syndrome is no different than the rest of our negative feelings, like jealousy or anger or frustration or, guilt. These feelings are meant to fuel change. These feelings are important to our own well-being because we change because of them. We make a change because of them. Imposter syndrome is no different. When we start feeling it, it's us telling ourselves that something is wrong and we need to fix it. And if we catch it early, we don't burn out. So these are the questions I really like to ask myself as soon as I start feeling it, as soon as I identify, oh gosh, I'm feeling kind of crappy about myself right now. Is this imposter syndrome? Am I, the first question is, why right now? Why at this very moment am I feeling like this? Not this overreaching, why do I feel like this in general, but why am I feeling like that standing here in this room right now? Is it because I'm tired? Is it because everyone else is around me and they're talking about something that I don't know very well? Is it because I'm in a funk? Is it because I'm having a hard time understanding this bit of code? Why right now? And then what would make me feel less like an imposter right now? And I'm not talking about the sarcastic, if I only knew everything, because that's not going to get you anywhere. So what would make me feel less like an imposter syndrome? Feel less like an imposter right now. Sometimes when I'm sitting there staring at the code and staring and it still doesn't make sense, the answer is to get up and walk away. Like sometimes you not just need to go get a drink, but sometimes you just need to leave for the day. Like you're done. Your brain is fried, this thing isn't going anywhere, just go home. Or maybe you're standing in that room and everyone's talking about React, but the only thing you know is Angular. Or I did the opposite. I went to NGConf. I was like the only React girl in an entire room of Angular people, and there's like 1,200 of them. Had no idea what was going on. I was confused. So the question is, what would make you feel less like an imposter right now? Is it knowing? Is it taking a break? Is it getting rest? And then is that an actionable answer I can act on right now? And that goes back to the sarcasm portion. That we very easily can tell ourselves, oh, if only I were smarter, if only, I knew everything, if only this made more sense. It's about making sure that the answers that you give yourself are actionable. What can you do right now to fix that? Can you join a conversation and ask questions? What do you mean by that? How does that actually work? Or walk up to your boss and say, you know what, I am absolutely lost here. I need a pair. I need a pair program for a while just so that we can like bounce ideas off. I've hit a roadblock. Or maybe it's, I need to go see a therapist and figure out why it's taking me 6 hours to do the dishes. Being able to take these steps are important because imposter syndrome doesn't stop with the feeling of feeling like you're an imposter, of feeling like you're not as smart as you need people to feel like you are. Like you think that everyone expects you to be this really smart person and you're not. And you feel like you're in the wrong room and you don't want anyone to know. You know, that's the difference between where you think you should be and where you actually are, where you think other people think you are, and where you actually are or where you think you are. And bridging that gap and bringing those together. So asking these questions help me. It no longer means that imposter syndrome is going to cause burnout. It no longer means that it's a long-term feeling for me. It's a fleeting thought. Oh, there it is, my old friend. Why am I feeling it now? What would make me feel less like an imposter? And is that something I can do right now? And if it's not something I can do right now, is it something I can do in the next week? Is it something where I have to say, you know what, I'm just not going to know this thing. I am going to do something else instead. I am going to find a friend who knows it. And then when I need that friend, I will call on them. Because I can't know everything. There's no way on this planet that anyone knows everything. That's why we need each other. That's why we build these systems. That's why we come to conferences to meet other people that can help fill the gaps of things that we don't know. Make those connections. Create those support structures so that when you need them, you have them. So when you're sitting there staring at that Webpack config for your second hour and trying to figure out why your build time is so high or why it seems to be duplicating your CSS, you're like, you know what? I know a person. They know Webpack better than me. Let's call and see what they think. It no longer is a case of imposter syndrome. It's a case of reaching out and utilizing your support structure. And that's what our support structures are for. Imposter syndrome was meant to help us change, to change the situation we're in, to take care of ourselves. Because we don't want to fall into that cycle again of sleeplessness, causes stupidity, causes sleeplessness. And so when imposter syndrome comes back, you'll know the steps that you need to take. And you also know that you've built a support structure around you to help fulfill that. The end.